to this week's Fireside Chat with Jesse. I am joined today by Mark Farlin, Head of Infrastructure and Healthcare at Leaf Commercial Capital. Thanks for joining me, Mark.
Glad to be here. Appreciate the invite.
It's great to have you on here. It's nice to be, with somebody else from the Southwest. So hopefully, is it cooling off a little bit in SoCal?
Yeah, it was a bit of a cooler summer, heated up for a couple of days. And then, in California, anything below 75 is cold. So right now people are starting to get out the jackets and the hoodies.
Saw it last night when I was watching that Dodgers Diamondbacks game, people in their jackets. And I'm like, come on. Come on. Yeah. It's still in the mid 90s here. And you're just like, God, stop it.
Well, people adapt to their surroundings, right? You've got the West Coast games where people are got their hoodies, and still in early October in the East Coast, they're wearing short sleeves if it's 50s.
It's me.
Yeah.
Well,
I've been all over.
It's great to have you on.
Yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Oh, no big deal, man. No big deal. Go ahead.
I was going to say, I've been all over, and I tend to think it's more of the insulation a person carries with them than really where they live all the time.
I agree with that. And that's years worth of travel and sales in equipment finance has led to me having multiple layers of insulation. So I can definitely relate.
Yeah, temperature doesn't bother me quite as much as it might other people.
That's fantastic. So, Mark, for the people who haven't had the privilege of meeting you, do you mind just kind of introducing yourself and your career to date in equipment finance?
Sure. So I've been in equipment finance now since 1999, and that's really aging myself, if you can't tell by the silver and gray growing into my hair. It's amazing. It's gone so fast. And like most people in the industry, I didn't go to college and study a major that led me to want to jump right into equipment financing. It wasn't one of the main topics or foci of the different schools offering of their programs. So, I graduated college, got my job. I was, went through the recruiting process on campus, took an executive training program with a retail business company called Lord & Taylor's and Robinson's May in the West Coast. And that went into the buying shop, and it was a part of an executive training program. I thought it'd be a great experience. You learn all the components of running your small business, which would be a buying shop. And I thought it'd be great because eventually I wanted to own and run my own business. So, and it was also one of the ones that I got an offer from. So when you're a recent college grad and you get a good offer and it's got some training with it, you typically tend to grab it. So I did that. Realized it wasn't long after I realized retail was not exactly what I wanted to be in. It was a good training program. I did my time there, was performing well, but the upside and really the freedom to grow and the dynamic aspect of a day-to-day challenge wasn't there. And I was lucky enough to know someone whose husband was in the equipment finance industry and got me an interview. And this was pre-Y2K, so pre-2000. It got me an interview to a company called Amplicon Financial, and I knew nothing about Amplicon Financial. And lo and behold, they were hiring anyone and everybody at this point in time. I think they had gone through some changes and some mass layoffs, but it was a independent finance company in Orange County, cold calling, think of the boiler room, the inside sales, cold calling, pounding on the phones. And you really had to learn how to read financials, which funding partners you could work with, and pick up the phone and dial across industries. I was given Georgia and Florida, obviously a bit of a country boy, so that made sense. And then they gave you a couple of zip codes in New York City, so you feel like you're a Wall Street, the Wolf of Wall Street type. So they really lead these young guys on like us. So worked there and luckily had some good success. I simply just sold on integrity and trying to do right by my customers. And I think that went kind of against the norm for what their reputation was. So I was a bit of an outlier there for a while, but it was a great training ground. And from there, I ran across an old classmate of mine who was working at GE and working with GE Healthcare Financial Services, Roman Slobodinsky, a really good friend of mine. from college. He was an athlete with me in school. We had some classes together. We ran across each other in Orange County. Hey, got up. What are you doing in financing? Hey, where you at? I'm over here. He's like, hey, I started out Balboa. Now I'm at GE. It's a great place to be. Roman was actually getting promoted and got me an interview for his old position within GE Healthcare Financial Services, which I jumped on. After cold calling with a company name like Amplicon, and people are Amplicon, who, what, where. I've read about you guys in the Wall Street, right? All of these different things. To have an opportunity to go to a reputable company with a big name people would recognize, right, was obviously something I was very eager to seize the opportunity on. Luckily, I was able to get that job. And my first role there was supporting the 13 Western states in their small ticket business, their flow business, right? So anything really under 500,000, and did that job and did it very well. And I think it's funny because coming from Amplicon, an independent company, you go into more of a vendor based. You're supporting GE medical systems. You're working with hospitals, doctor's office, outpatient centers, right? And you're given all these leads, and your main job is to support the equipment reps. And that's great. But once I started talking to the customers, that was like gold to me after, spending the time at Amplicon, where you were dying to get to decision makers on the phone. So when I got the decision makers on the phone, I was like, well, what else can I finance? What else can I finance? I mean, here we're working here, and I did very well because I usually did about dollar for dollar of my GE budget with extra CapEx financing. So it helped me perform very well.
Sure.
I, coming from a sports background, I really enjoyed the team environment and working with the equipment reps, being teammates with them, and then driving sales. And that got me promoted. And I just followed that along, and I was promoted a couple of times within GE, and it eventually led to a relocation out to Dallas, Texas, and was doing really well there. And I was looking at my skill set, and this was something that I had the privilege of meeting someone very early on who took me under their wing, a gentleman by the name of Bill Fight. And he said that, it's very common in our industry for folks to get started in one of the verticals or niches of financing: bank-owned equipment companies, independents, or vendor captives. And he said, one of the ways you could really, build a robust skill set and an experience set, and then really differentiate yourself over your career for future leadership opportunities, or, eventually, if I wanted to start my own finance company, et cetera, was get involved in each of them. Cross-pollinate the different business lines. So when I was at GE and I was approaching 5 years, I was recruited by City Capital, which was Citicorp's the vendor and direct equipment finance company at that time, led by Ted Drake and Winston Abbott, and was recruited to head up their healthcare and then also some energy financing. We did some performance contracting, tax exempt financing. It was a great opportunity at that time. 2004, Citi was the world's #1 financial services company. So it was kind of going from one 800-pound gorilla in the equipment finance in the healthcare world of GE to, 800-pound gorilla in the finance world. And City Capital was a great shop. I learned a ton about just, the bank ways of doing things, risk assessment, criteria, pricing, working with bankers, relationship managers. Learned a lot about tax exempt financing that, I didn't do a lot of that really at GE. We had specialists we would hand those deals off to, but at Citi, we were doing all of it. And had a really good run there, covering from Dallas, most of the Southwest territory. I had a nice 7-state region, learned a lot. And when the economy was crashing, or prior to that, GE bought Citi back. And I was kind of looking at the decision, do I want to stay at GE or do I want to continue to take the steps in my career? And luckily, I had an opportunity at that point in time to go to Olympus Financial Services, which was a pure vendor captive, right? A Japanese-owned medical device company. Really, really heavy presence in the ear, nose, and throat, and the GI markets, right? Anything that a camera and a scope can go into in a human body, an orifice, and conduct procedures, Olympus sold products for. And it was a good sized shop. It was truly a pure vendor captive. They had previously a private label program with GE up until about 2000, but they were running their own paper, their own money, and holding all of their own deals. So I went there and took a senior role and started my leadership experience, right? Running the strategic accounts and large corporate IDNs, and the sales activities in there for the Olympus Financial Services team. It was really an interesting job working for a Japanese-owned manufacturer. It had had a whole unique set, right, of different kind of culture, and I really enjoyed it because I love the GE rah and go get them. Citi was a bit more of a bank, a little bit more buttoned down, right, a little bit different kind of polish to it. And then you come to the Japanese-owned manufacturer, and again, you're supporting equipment reps, you're driving business, but you're also being very aware of what's going on and looking out for the greater good. And the communication was different. So that was a great learning experience. Just again, you're pollinating your experiences, who you're working with, the different objectives that are coming down from on top from corporate headquarters are different amongst the three, right? They're always different. What's the main driver? What are you doing? What's the financial services component really meant to do? Had a really good run there. Had really two unique experiences there because we had to, if you think back a few years, you remember there was a big earthquake, right, a tsunami, and there was a nuclear reactor problem that went on in Japan, and that happened right during our fourth quarter fiscal year, and there was a lot of disruption going on, and there were people worried. Yeah, there were people worried about, are you going to be able to are you going to be able to deliver your goods and services, and are you going to make your numbers? Because our fiscal year, Japanese fourth quarter is a March 31st year end. And that happened, I can't remember the exact date, but I want to say it was either the last week of April or the first week of March. I'm sorry, the last week of February or the first week of March. So it was an interesting time. And it was good to see the teamwork that went on. It was really impressive at that point. But, also had to navigate through a short time later, a scandal, right? Olympus had a scandal at corporate, overvaluation of some of their acquisitions of some of the medical companies. I believe the company was Drivers ACMI, and they were close to being delisted. They were close to being delisted by the Nikkei stock index, and a lot of different things were going on far away from the US headquarters, right? But there were questions, and not only do your customers have questions when things like that go on, but your team, your sales team, your sales reps, your partners, your equipment reps. What's going on? Are you going to have the money to complete these contracts? Are you guys going to be around? And obviously they sailed through it, and Olympus has, grown tremendously and continues to do extremely well. One of the main vendor captive finance sources out there. But it was a great experience to learn through that. The thing that I really understood at Olympus that I took with me, right, was it's never safe to assume certain things, right, by body language, right? You need to get confirmation, and that goes across. And frankly, I learned that a few times the wrong way, but it definitely goes across body language and trying to read people's behavior. And you need to make sure you get confirmation of green lights and red lights on strategic objectives. But it was really a great experience. And it kind of got my hands into capital markets at that point, because I was at Olympus when the 2008, 2009 happened, right? And there was obviously a lot of constriction in the financing industry. Our money was coming from Olympus Corporate in Japan. And we had healthcare customers coming to us saying, hey, our funding sources aren't lending right now. They've kind of frozen us. Can you do other projects other than Olympus gear? And up until that point in time, Olympus wouldn't finance really anything other than Olympus gear.
Sure.
Right. Which makes sense. Right. Because, they're a manufacturer. They're not a finance company. So their job is to place gear. What was great, though, and I credit the willingness of my boss at that time, John Parson, and working with our finance guy, Bill Flynn, at the time, was to put together kind of a revolver line to allow us to finance Olympus customers and finance projects, and then I would work to syndicate them. right? So we could, and a lot of times we had to hold them for a while, months, and even a year or more in certain cases. But it got my hands into the capital markets and my kind of first taste of experience. I mean, back at GE and City, sure, I had customers we would syndicate, but that I was usually, a handoff removed from that. I would hand it off to a syndication specialist or capital market specialist. And here at Olympus, we had to present a business plan of how we would utilize this, how we would generate fee income. But more importantly, and I think this is why it was really kind of green lighted, was this is how it's going to improve your goodwill and your name and reputation in the industry, because you're finding a way to service customers' needs in a time of need, right? And while you may not make a lot of money from it, you're helping, and it will pay off in the long run. And it was a good decision, and it was a great experience, and it was something that really piqued my interest going forward. So that's obviously already a mouthful, but I'm only about halfway through since I'm so old. So if you want me to keep, if you want me to keep going, I'll keep going.
Sure, absolutely. I mean, actually, we can pause for a second there, because the whole Lord and Taylor discussion is interesting to me. So, I graduated high school in '99. So in 2001, what was that? My sophomore year of college, there was a job fair going on. I just walked into a job fair and met with J.C. Penney, and ended up with an internship with J.C. Penney. And then October of my senior year, they called me up and they were like, "Hey, you did really well with your internship. What store do you want?" And it's like, okay, give me the biggest store, because I want the management, I don't have to worry about finding a job, right? So, but like you with retail, I think I lasted 18 months. And then it was like, okay, this guy's been here for 20 years. How much money are you making and what's going on? Because I got promoted within like 3 months to a full manager. And I'm like, I don't know if this is for me.
Well, it sounds like you went in, and it's funny because at every job fair, right, you'd have J.C. Penney, Macy's, or in the May Corporation, which was Lord and Taylor, right? And they're recruiting, and it sounds like you went into one of the locations, right, the actual shops, whether it was in a mall or something, or did you go into the buying office?
Oh no, it was in our student lair at West Virginia. It was just actually like a recruiting fair that they had at the school. Yeah. And it was traditionally for juniors and seniors. But as a sophomore, I was like, let's just see what's going on. And there happened to be a store in upstate New York where I was from that I could go have an internship at. And I'm like, beautiful.
Well, and you're right, Bill. I went into the buying office with the training program, and then every so often we had to go out and do tours of the stores. And then around Thanksgiving or Christmas, right, you go restock, and you get out and you had extra hands helping your major locations, right, your major stores. And I mean, I have a lot of respect for those people, because the amount of time they spend on their feet and the work in an organization, and really with limited resources that they have, it's pretty impressive what they get done. But like you, I'm looking and I'm saying, wow, I enjoyed this, 12-month training program, and I enjoyed all these, aspects we've learned, and, sitting with the C-suite, the CEO and the CFO and the chief technology officer, and great experience. But man, everyone around here has been in their jobs for like 20 years, and none of them really didn't seem to be making it big. And a lot of them seemed really burned out, quite honestly, with very limited quality of life, because it was and I just realized that wasn't something I wanted to chase. I love working hard, but it was kind of, to me, was monotonous. Do the same thing every Monday to this Tuesday. And I'm just like,
and it's like your bonus structure, and like your financial glass ceiling and everything else. And it's like, what's going on? No.
Yeah. No,
this is what I want to get to. Like, come on.
But to get out there and actually to do it, when you get into other jobs and you're working hard and you look back, and I'm sure you can relate to this, right? The hours on your feet, or the number of hours just working to get projects done or get sales done or marketing campaigns done that you needed to launch. And then I also go back to, I grew up on a farm, so I did a lot of manual work, a lot of hard labor, and then playing sports through college, trying to balance the workouts and the practice and the classes. When I started getting into, and I go back to Amplicon, and it was cold calling. I couldn't believe some folks would complain about making 60, 70 cold calls a day. And I'm like, we're sitting here, we got a database, and I think it was the ACT database at that time was what was still being used in 98, 99. And I just realized I can make really good money, and I can outwork all of these people because I was used to it. And to me, this wasn't hard work. You're calling. Yeah, I
Sure.
mean, you got to be used to rejection, but I mean,
Yeah.
I'd go through hours a day in college of sitting through film, watching our practice or games, and our coach would tell me 85 different things I did wrong on one play over and over. So you get really thick skin, right? So you just keep going, and you kind of become stubborn and a bit of a bone in a china shop. So getting into finance, yeah, it takes hard work, but be careful what you wish for, because the grass isn't always greener in a lot of places. It's greenest where you
Yeah,
water,
no.
right?
I mean, I grew up on 300 acres of farmland, so it was more agriculture, not like animals. So
Yeah.
I was. It's amazing how much our upbringing is actually aligned. Other than the fact that I didn't play sports in college. Yeah, I mean, my next job after J.C. Penney was like, hey, you have a base salary of 25 grand. You couldn't live on that in New York City where I lived. So it's like if I don't go out and sell something, then I'm not going to be able to eat. So it was true cold calling for Yellow Book, believe it or not.
Right. Yeah.
And that was getting chased out of businesses by dogs and stuff. Like that's where you learn how to really, really cut your teeth and see if sales is something for you.
Well, and even that, right? I mean, there's on the pavement, feet on the street and pounding the pavement in your first kind of your sales jobs. And then there's the cold calling culture. And one thing I did like about the folks at Amplicon is once every month we would get out and we would do blitzes in the area around Orange County just to practice getting out and try and go get leads and talking to people. And I thought that was really good experience, right? Because it's kind of like the keyboard warriors of today. They can say and do whatever they want behind the keyboard. People can do that on the phone too, right? But when you're actually in person talking to folks and looking them in the eye, how are you going to react? How are you going to handle their objections? How are you going to handle the different things going on? How are you going to handle hostile, irritated, want nothing to do with you attitudes, right? Completely disinterested, in fact, very agitated that you're taking up their time. How are you going to handle that?
Yeah, there's
right?
there's always, well, especially in these settings. I mean, I remember going to Malvern in that corporate office there and being in a boardroom with like 20 people, and there's always like 2 or 3 that are just like, no, I don't want to do anything. I don't want to change anything.
Yeah, because you're
on board.
Yeah, you're going to make my life more difficult, and I don't want any more to-do list. So I really am finding every reason I can to justify and support my no. So yeah,
exactly.
I
So
get it.
that was always those key where it's like, as a salesperson in the room setting up a demo for something, it was always like, okay, well, when the objectors kind of truly show themselves, don't worry, I got that. And find different ways that you can bring them eventually on your side. Because if you can bring them on your side, it makes it a lot easier.
Well, and you can tell I obviously talk a lot, but one of the things I learned really early on in person is you need to shut up and listen. And that was kind of hard for me to learn very early on, but I'm glad I did at one point in time get it through my thick skull. So, I've appreciated everywhere I've been, and at Olympus, I love working for an international company. But they were also going through some changes, and they were consolidating some things, and they were looking for a lot of their management to kind of be more centrally located. And I was in California. At that point in time, I had moved back to California after living both in Texas and Colorado with 2 different job relocations. I was lucky enough to have a wife who was willing to move and go see the country, but we moved back to California because we wanted to be here to raise our kids. And Olympus was at the point too where they're like, hey, we want a lot of our folks, after some of the things that had gone on at corporate and some of the lack of control, they wanted a lot more people centrally located at that point in time. And I was also at the point in my career, getting closer to 6 years there, I wanted to take the next step and I wanted to really start managing a full-time team. That was more of a money company, not a manufacturer, and I had an opportunity to get into the independent financing side again in a senior leadership role at First National Capital, right? And that was a syndicated funding model, but it was independent. They were private and they were wanting to go to an event, so it had some really good upside, and it was local to where I had moved, and it was kind of going back to the roots of cold calling, inside sales, generalist, and had a really good run there. Was also able to help them take to an event. They actually sold into an ESOP, which was great, employee stock ownership program. That company continues to do very well now. But being there, I like, because I had been healthcare focused for so long, it got me back into all the other industries, right? We had on average, we averaged probably around 50 to 55 sales reps calling, broken out into some regions with some really good region managers that had been there a long time, actually are still there now, and really good ops and a syndication team. They syndicate a lot of their business. They do hold on portfolio, but again, it took me back to what I had kind of gotten a taste of at Olympus, and that was starting to look into capital markets and realize the potential. Because if you go way back to when you start and you get a customer and when you're cold calling and you get them to work with you, it's amazing what you want to do to make sure you keep them. And I looked at capital markets and syndication, even through GE and through Olympus and helping them in hard times. They start coming to you and you almost kind of get a first look at things. And if you're able to simplify their life and you can bring more money to their balance sheet without them having to go through T's and C's and the 85 cold calls and email campaigns they get, right? To get more financing companies on board, you're doing a huge service to them, and it elevates you as a strategic partner. And First National was able to do that because in those kinds of models, right, in an independent model, you're looking at multitudes of credits, right? You're not limited by banks with the really top tier investment grade credits, and you have to worry maybe if you got bank exposure or investment exposure or different cash product exposure. Equipment, your job really is to move, when you're a vendor, move that gear. And yeah, maybe you might do some others, but your job is to move that gear, so they don't have tons of extra capital that they want to throw on their non-captive equipment. At independent, you can fund for your own, you can syndicate, and you're really able to sell 10, 20, 30, 40 different balance sheets, risk assessment, pricing, structuring, as big as your capital markets network is. And First National really, really opened my eyes to how powerful that can be. But went through an event, and I was lucky enough to have been introduced to some folks at TCF, and they were going through some promotions and leadership changes, and they had an opening to take over their healthcare team. And I was interested at that point in time to get back into the bank-owned world, and I had a great run there with those folks. Gary Peterson, Jeff Wirtz, and Bill Hennick were the main execs that I worked on at that team. And we had a very good run there, was there for a number of years. And that was really healthcare vendor and some direct, but a lot of vendor and a little bit of some third party buying. And, I was also out there again, I think I'm a magnet, kind of keep tying towards capital markets, because I was moving towards capital markets in my role there too. And I think, if you can tell, I like doing a lot of things, and I like having my hands in a lot of things. I like to build, I like to fix, and I like my hands on things. I don't like to babysit. I'm not a good babysitter. So I like challenges and different things going on. And, I was recruited, and this gets us to Leaf, right, where I am now. I was recruited after a good run at TCF. I was recruited by Miles Herman and Crit Demet to come over to Leaf. And this was in 2019. And Leaf, I knew who Leaf was, but I had always kind of saw Leaf as a small ticket office copier. I really wasn't aware, because I hadn't seen them a lot in healthcare, and I didn't really know who they were. And when I was approached, I was like, I think you might be calling the wrong guy. I don't know that I'm the person that you're looking for. But after I spent some time with Miles and Crit, I was really impressed with what they were doing. And I was recruited over during a phase that Leaf was going through a lot of expansion. And I'm going to put a little pin in that thought because I'm going to tell you a little bit about Leaf up to the point they recruited me. Okay. So Leaf was started by Crit Miles in 2001 as an independent. Okay. And they were independent up until 2017 when they were bought by People's United Bank. Okay. So they had been bought by People's United Bank. And over in 2018 and 2019, they had experienced really exponential growth. And they had been charged by People's United to keep growing, right? They had bought two different finance companies, Bar Technology, which was the team Gary Sutton had built out of Frisco, Texas. And they had also bought a team out of Baltimore, Maryland, Vend Finance, which is a franchise financing company. So they had just, they were going through these acquisitions, and the reason Miles had recruited me was they were looking to build a healthcare business, right? That would be both vendor, direct, and some third-party activity. So they wanted to build a healthcare business, and they also liked the fact that I had a lot of vendor captive experience as well, and then some capital markets experience. And Miles and Crit really sold me on the fact of their growth mode, building something new, coming in, helping, work with the great leadership team he has at Leap. And thankfully, I'm still working with them all, although, fortunately and unfortunately, Crit's putting a cap to a great career and retiring, at the end of this year in terms of full-time work. But, working with the ops and the credit team headed by John Beard. And, we talked a little bit earlier off camera about Sandy and the operations team and the finance team led by Paul Pikowski and the IT team led by Mike McKee. Just great individuals. And on top of it, they had this great marketing team with Michelle Esperanza, right? And they have all of these things going on. And the real draw to it wasn't about we can do all these things and we're great at them now. It's we look to continue to grow and become good, and we want to keep finding ways to get better. And, I started doing some research on them, saw they had won a couple of operational excellence awards from the ELFA, saw that they were very heavily invested in the Equipment Finance and Leasing Association. Crit, Miles, Michelle, Joe Bannister, all these people spend time working in the ELFA, in our industry, right? And in the foundation and lease pack and just doing all of those things that I really wanted to start to get into more, because I started going a little bit to Capital Connections and really was enjoying the folks I was meeting at ELFA and the connections and just learning from other people who are very successful, and the way it was more of a big association, fraternity, sorority kind of joined together versus a bunch of competitors pitted against each other, right? Best practice sharing. There's big enough pie for us all to eat, right? Now we're all competitive and we want to rank high, right? But sure, we can all win. And I really enjoyed that. And the fact that they were so heavily invested in that and they had performed well and were highly recognized were all things that really drew me to taking that opportunity. And I'm very glad I have. We built a good team here. I spend most of my time with Miles in terms of reporting up into Miles, who's now our CEO. He was the president and COO when I started, while Crit was the CEO. And I've really enjoyed working with the folks, because what they represented during the interview process is what they've turned out to be. And I've been lucky enough to have a lot of people do that over my career. Who they are when they interview and who they are once you're working with them are the same, or at least overlap a lot. I've been lucky enough because I've heard horror stories of people who haven't. So, Leaf, we've continued to grow. A little bit about Leaf, if you want to talk a little bit about the business channels, right? Leaf's core business was probably their office products and smaller ticket items and their diversified markets business. Okay. So they work with manufacturers, dealers, distributors, and they are excellent at doing the small ticket. And they also, I want to say maybe about 2007, 2008, they were building an inside sales team in all places, Orange County, California, right? Because that seems to be one of the few, inside sales meccas of the world, led by Richie Voihra and his team. So we have a small business finance group channel that calls directly on end users now, right? And across all industries, he's built a really good team. They do an excellent job cold calling. Um, and, so we've got office products, diversified markets, which was kind of built in has morphed into such a sizable business. It's kind of become its own division within Leaf, with the diversified markets, small business finance group. We also have now VAR technology, which it's rebranded now to Leaf. And we have Bend, right, which obviously is the franchise part. And now we have my business, which is the healthcare and infrastructure part. So with all of that, it's a great mix because, Leaf in its career, or in its history, I should say, has funded over $10 billion of business with over 300,000 customers. And it really, it's got such a wide berth of industries it goes into, assets it finance, different types of financing products. And I really have enjoyed the fact that they've had great leadership that can communicate their business proposition and value to the bank when it was working with Peoples, and Miles and Crit continued to do that with M&T, and we continue to have great support. So we were owned by Peoples, which was acquired by M&T in April of 2022. So, we are one of three main leasing components of M&T. Now you have M&T Equipment Finance, which was kind of their legacy business, doing a lot of larger ticket products, working with the banks and relationship managers. And then we also now have M&T Capital and Leasing, which was the old People's Capital and Leasing that is rebranded as M&T, which is Mickey's business. So a larger ticket business, a lot of direct business, and also some vendor stuff as well. But Leaf has really done a good job creating its own brand, has grown. We've gotten into so many different industries, and we've got a great capital markets team in terms of the buy side, led by Bob Herman. Fortunately, I get to work a little bit with him, and we've grown to enough size and scale now. When the bank first bought them in 2017, add earning assets, no selling, right? There's no need to sell. We want anything you can get done, right? That fits our credit. Well, we've grown so much, and our portfolio continues to perform and is at enough of a level that we are now incorporating more of an also originate to syndicate strategy, right? Which luckily Miles has put me, in a position to help lead that initiative. So a lot of stuff going on at Leaf.
No, I mean, Leafs, I want to say they were probably my 7th or 8th client that I ever had in equipment finance. And that goes back to probably 2006, Mark. And it was Miles, Crit, and it was Paul. And it's also these leaders that you're mentioning that have ascended in the organization have been with Miles and Crit for a while. So that's a testament to their leadership abilities. And it's definitely a great organization. And that's why the banks are probably just like, why am I going to mess with this well-oiled machine? Go.
Yeah. I think you said it exactly right. The tenure, when I was first talking to him, I was really impressed by the tenure. Right. I mean, everyone I met was 10, 15 years with Leaf, right? Not just in the industry, with Leaf. And what I also really liked was that they had been promoted within, but there was a good mixture of bringing some outside professionals to kind of mix to the pool. So they always had a little bit of fresh perspective. And I think the fact that the leadership team is always so heavily involved in the ELFA, they don't get that whole, tunnel vision where it's only our way, and they're open to a lot of different things going on. So they're a lot more proactive than reactive. So all of those things that I saw, or at least I thought I saw when I was being recruited, have actually turned out to be very true. And the leadership, I've got to see, Miles and Crit and lead through COVID. I've got to see them lead through the M&T acquisition. And I'm very impressed with how they put the well-being of their team, their business, their employees, and taking care of the customers and doing what's right. It's not just something they talk about, and they showed that throughout. And I've been very thankful to have been able to work with them, and I've learned a ton from them. And and they still, the one thing that's kind of common, first of all, everyone works hard, and very good communicators. But what you don't hear is, no, we can't do that. It's, how can we find a way to do that? Does it make sense to do that? It's, no, we don't do that. And then
Sure.
we're not going to talk about it. And, you know, there are a lot of places that, hey, we're really good at this and this is all we ever wanted to do. Okay, that's fine. But that kind of, in my mind, goes back to the babysitting component, right? You get good at something, you just kind of keep it good. And, you know, a lot of people make a lot of money doing that, but that just doesn't, that doesn't challenge me and keep my interest going. And in the way that Miles and Crit have built this culture, and they've performed, like you said, because they've performed, most groups tend to leave them alone and let them operate, as of course within bank guidelines and compliance and regulations, right? But they typically say, hey, we really like what you're doing, we're not going to mess with you. And that's been true for as long as I've been here. And you know, there's probably a lot that goes on behind the scenes that Miles and Crit have worked with the bank execs over all these years. And I'm sure part of it is they had great relationships with the folks that first bought them with Peoples, but they've done a great job of communicating the value prop and performance with M&T. And I hope it keeps going that way, right? They can fly in and provide us that overhead support. Yeah. So,
well, you know, I mean, you get that leaf. Oh, I was going to say, you get that leaf level of service with the technology platforms that you guys have built throughout the years, with potential some bank rates. I mean, that's a recipe for just continued success, which is awesome.
Yeah, because it's great point, Jesse. It's an independent mindset of looking at how to provide what the market needs, right? Of building solutions. It's definitely an independent company mindset. Yeah, bank rates. And you know what? The common thing to bridge that, obviously, is credit. And John Beard and Randy Anderson, who run our credit team, they do a tremendous job of walking that line of what makes sense for the bank's racks, and what's a good, what's a good deal, what are good transactions, what are good relationships, and what could be great but aren't quite there yet, and how could we structure around it to mitigate risk, and where do we use some silver bullets within reason. And they've been tremendous. And I think that's probably part of the reason that, that the bank leadership has, kind of let it perform as is because that portfolio, the defaults, delinquencies, while maybe we're not operating at the historic lows with the PPP money and everyone at 2 basis points of default, right? But we're still well below industry norm. And I think Leaf has always performed that way in terms of looking at the LFA. So you got a lot of really good credit folks combining and marrying up technology, bank rates, and independent mindset on how to do things. And it's played well. And M&T, I don't really have any complaints so far. They've tend to let Miles and Crit run. They've supported us. They're continuing to tell us they want us to continue to grow, which is great. There's the bumps in any kind of integration that you go with, whether it's emails or business cards, whatever. But they've actually worked really hard to communicate and frequently, and I think have done a pretty good job. And now, we went from Peoples, which was, 80 plus or so billion in assets, now to over 200 billion in assets, and in the 11th largest U.S. bank. So I'm really excited to see where this can grow.
Perfect. And I guess while we're talking about delinquencies and everything else, what are you seeing from kind of like the state of the economy and where we're at right now, Mark?
Well, it definitely hasn't been dull for any of us since 2020, right? Since first quarter 2020, whether it's managing through COVID and kind of getting out of that, to now managing rate hikes and inflation. And there's a lot of people in our industry who are younger than myself who probably never experienced anything below almost 0% Fed rates, right? Yeah. What do you mean index? What do you mean we've got to go back and raise our payment because we have to index? And how do we handle this? And what do we do with pro rata? And our rate sheets, we have to update our rate sheets. What are you talking about, right? So it's been very dynamic. The folks pre-2008 have probably seen it. We saw a little bit after Y2K, and even folks who were in the industry before me have, saw it in the early 90s. But it's a case where I'm seeing the market in certain areas slow down. But in other certain areas, they can't slow down because they've got enough business they need to keep going. So that's a very general term. I see business overall bumpy because everyone wants to know what's going on. Things cost more. Everything costs more. But this is one of the reasons I got into financing in the first place, Jesse. I was looking at, when I was getting out of retail on the where do I want to go, right? I didn't know anything about equipment finance, but when I talked to my coworker's husband, he said, listen, it's a really good industry to be in regardless of where the economy is. And he made a lot of sense. He said, when the economy is good, companies need capital to grow and capitalize on that upward trend in the economy. And they don't want to use all their own capital to do it. When the economy is kind of flat, right? They need to do some cost cutting. They want to protect their margins, but they still need to, get equipment, hardware, software, whatever it is to provide their goods and services. When the economy's bad or rates are rising, well, they still need to provide goods and services. There are different business opportunities, market share for different companies at different points in times that they can grab. And they don't have the capital to use on their own, right? So they need to get some other capital infusion and capital products to get going, even when it's expensive, right? Because they need money to operate. And most folks don't like to pay their own cash to do everything. So I'm seeing that right now. Okay. Different, our business as a whole, I think the industry as a whole, if you look at where a lot of people probably thought it was going to be third, fourth quarter last year, I think it's probably performed slightly better in terms of origination. Portfolio performance is starting to get a little bumpier, starting to see a little bit more instances of fraudulent attempts. Certain industries have kind of taken bits of dips, but while they're, we have a few of those, we've had others that have kind of spiked in the meantime that were maybe a little bit flat during COVID. So it's really unique. And I'll use healthcare kind of as a microcosm, right? COVID's going on, and usually healthcare has been any kind of recession proof of anything. But when COVID happened and everything was shut down except for treating COVID patients in life or death situations, right? Equipment financing really came to a halt on MRIs and CTs and imaging, anything non-COVID related. Now, if you had ventilators and beds, right, those things were in high demand. But everything else came to a halt. You start coming out of COVID and they start doing the procedures again and opening up, you start seeing that equipment moving again. And of course, the vendor captives are dying to move their equipment. So extremely aggressive in rates, as they should be, right? Place their equipment. Hospitals are getting PPP money, tons of money everywhere. Everyone's bond rating looks great. You start seeing that turn, right? PP money starting to run out. Costs are continuing to rise, especially in hospitals. If you look at something like nursing, right? Nursing costs, I think, are 238 or 239% of where they were even 2 or 3 years ago. Nursing shortages, the amount of overtime they work, just the amount it costs to run their business is gone up exponentially, and they don't have all that cash coming in from the government that they had as a safety net. So their acquisitions look to have kind of slowed. And you've also seen over this whole time a directed move to more outpatient procedures. So, okay, hospitals are slowing down, but outpatients and ambulatory surgery centers are starting to spike, and they've been kind of growing over the years, right? Because it saves the government a lot of money to not take up beds in a hospital, right? It's a lot less expensive from insurance and covering Medicare and Medicaid in a hospital than it does to do a outpatient procedure or to do a short-term, 1 or 2 day procedure, right, in a outpatient facility.
Yeah.
So you're seeing equipment needs and CapEx needs rise there. You're seeing a lot of startups, a lot of joint ventures with hospitals tying in because they want the referrals back and forth, but they don't need the equipment. These new centers need the equipment. So vendors are now, obviously, there's a lot of growth in those areas. So again, it's like the rest of the economies in the different industries, even within healthcare, you kind of have these two. One's kind of slowed down or kind of stalled, while the other one's still picking up, even with the cost increases. So maybe that makes sense to people in healthcare, but I was just trying to draw a little bit of parallel there.
No, and thank you for sharing. And I agree. I want to say is more than half of our industry has probably never experienced a they probably weren't here before 2009, 2008. So
Yeah, you know, it's funny because when we started seeing some of this going on in 2020, when it started, you know, they started some of the rate increases, and you saw, of course, you had the transition from, you know, ICE to sulfur, and what's going, you know, what are we indexing? What are our cost of funds? What's going on? And LIBOR, and where's that going? Is retraining, and it reminds you to, you know, everyone can always look at the fancy cells, and it's kind of like a football coach saying, I'm going to draw up all these really cool diagrams, but if you can't do the fundamentals, blocking, tackling, your basic pricing, structuring, you know, protecting your yield while still being honest with the customer, right? You're not taking the customer to the cleaner. You're saying, hey, given where this is, you know, if this isn't a fund and install right now, there's the potential for rate movement. Now you're borrowing our money on progress payment or interim rent, whatever it may be, but I'm pricing this still at this yield. Here's the index, which they can access. Here's the amount of money I'm making, providing the money in this goods and services, and here's your rate. And if it moves, you protect the rate. All right, you protect the yield. I'm sorry, not the rate. You protect the yield. But it's a fundamental thing that, you know, some of the sales leaders in the industry haven't had to continue to teach a lot of. So, you know, this recent swing in the economy has I think reminded a lot of us we got to get back to the basics. I'm sure credit's looking back at the basics. I'm sure there was a big thing. How can we bump our app only up to $2 million and $3 million? And what else can we do with AI, right? Well, when things start going bad and defaults and delinquencies rise, everything goes back to fundamentals, right? So I think it's you know, lesson there is you always got to work to keep your fundamentals strong, and it's nice to add everything else on, but if your fundamentals are weak, eventually it's a house of cards and will crash on you.
Nope. Same page. So Mark, I asked everyone on here to give me a little fun fact about themselves. So what makes you tick outside of equipment finance?
My family. I was lucky enough to meet my wife in college. I got married when I was 21. Met her at USC and realized that was who I wanted to spend my life with. And luckily still married through all the trials and tribulations I probably put her through and work relocations. But yeah, I got married as a youngster in college.
That's awesome. Good for you. I mean, there's several USC alumni in equipment finance. Don Hansen's the biggest one that kind of biggest personality that kind of comes to mind, I guess I should say.
Well, John at BMO, right? He's a Trojan. You know, okay, another fun fact. The time I played at USC, I played with, I want to say 7 first-round draft picks in football. One of them was just elected to the Hall of Fame last year. Tony Baselli. So those were teammates of mine. Those are just first-round draft picks. And I played with 2 first-round draft picks on the baseball team. I played a little bit of baseball too. So
that's awesome.
Now, unfortunately, I wasn't one of the draft picks, but hey, I got to play with them, and I got to be next to greatness.
Well, nah, but I mean, you're in the equipment finance. Potentially, there's equipment finance Hall of Fame. Maybe you know, we have a shot at that.
Yeah, you know, the industry has been great. You know, get to meet individuals like yourself, and you know, working with the LFA, the foundation, Equipment Cares, you know, Lease Pack. I would just say for anyone who ever watches this, if they're thinking about getting involved, do. It only helps you, and you have such hands-on help from the different organizations anyway that are asking you to volunteer or you get elected to some of these committees. They make it easy to help, and you meet great people. It will ramp up your learning curve exponentially, and it will help you do business and avoid a lot of potholes and hard lessons. It helps you avoid a lot of them, and you have a lot of fun, and there's a lot of great people. And I love the fact that, you know, we're getting a little bit younger. We need to continue to get younger, and we're getting more diverse, and we're recruiting from a lot of different places and bringing a lot of folks in. And, you know, like I said, and I don't think you knew about it in West Virginia either, was, oh, I'm going to major in equipment financing. No, but it's such a great industry, and it can be very lucrative, and it's got a need that isn't going away. There's ways to get out in some of your local colleges or go back to where you're an alum and get in the business school, get into communications and some of the different the majors and do a presentation. We've got the material, we got the PowerPoint presentation, and get out and bring some new blood into the industry for us.
Nope, absolutely, Mark. Spot on, and well said. So thank you again for your time today, sir. I think this will air next week, so I will see you a week from when this airs in Arizona for the annual convention.
Sounds good. I appreciate the invite, Jesse. Enjoyed chatting with you and look forward to seeing you and everybody else in Arizona.
All right, sir. You have a good day. Take care.
You too.